Hello, my name is Wendy, and I'm the Vice President of Virtual Speakers Association International. And today I have here with me Owen Fitzpatrick, our very own Global Speaking Fellow. Owen has impacted millions in 30 over countries, aiming to help people think better for a better life. Owen's explored 100 over countries, even places like North Korea and Afghanistan, learning why we believe what we do and how to change it. With degrees in psychology, human development, and history, plus studies at Harvard and MIT, boy, he's got the brain power. At 17, Owen became Europe's youngest hypnotherapist, later hosting a TV show in Ireland, guiding people to overcome limiting beliefs. His mission, empowering us to believe better using neuroscience, NLP, and storytelling. So get ready for a quick and fascinating chat about changing beliefs on our podcast. So Owen, over to you. Can you share a bit about yourself and why you are a go-to person for global speaking?
Thank you very much, Dr. Wendy. Yes, absolutely. I mean, you just gave me such a lovely introduction. I don't have too much to add to it, but I have been doing this for about 25 years or so. I started when I was just a teenager, started speaking and training and delivering different types of coaching and programs to help people to really believe better, to help them to influence other people more effectively as well. And so I've been fortunate enough, as you mentioned, to travel to just over 100 countries, 31 of them to date. I've done talks or keynotes or trainings or speeches of some form. And it's really provided me with a great sense and understanding as to how you need to adapt when you are speaking around the world. So there's a lot of differences, and I'm sure we'll get into some of them as we go through the chat today. But there's a lot of differences between different cultures, and the real trick, I think, to being able to deliver not just where you're from or where you're based, but also to be able to travel and to be able to deliver in a way that the audience resonates, comes from that experience and really paying more attention to what's going on around you in that sense. I'm a psychologist, as you mentioned. That's something that I'm very passionate about. I spend a lot of time working on, reading, studying, learning. I've written a bunch of books on behavioral science as well. And I've always been passionate about what makes us believe what we do and how can we help ourselves to believe in more useful, more empowering ideas, changing our mindsets, and also how can we empower other people? How can we influence and impact others by helping them to believe better as well? So that's in a nutshell, just adding a little bit, but you really did a wonderful job in, I suppose, introducing me. So I can't add. In fact, I'm a little bit embarrassed because I always feel that whenever someone says too many nice things about me, I don't know where to look. So.
So I'm curious, have you ever been to this part of my world in Asia? I'm from Malaysia. So a lot of people don't know where Malaysia is. I always say, okay, it's in between Singapore and Thailand. Have you been to Malaysia?
I have, and I've delivered a workshop and a talk in Kuala Lumpur in 2013. And I was on, first of all, a morning TV show in Malaysia, believe it or not.
Wow.
Interviewed again when I went there. And also, I did a press conference, and a part of one of my I suppose, answers to a question about the economy of Malaysia at the time was featured on the national evening news. So I actually have a copy of both the interview I did on the morning show in Malaysia with the two hosts, and they were wonderful. And I also had, that was Morning AM, I think. I don't know if it's still going. And then I also have a clip of the national evening news where the news reporter, she's reading out the news, and then she mentions my name, and then it shows a clip of me on the news, and then it goes back and forth. So that's one of the highlights of my travels, was actually happened in Malaysia.
So if I could ask you one main difference that you see comparing your audience in the West as compared to the East, what would it be?
I think it depends. And you know, I know there's certain cliches that we could have that, you know, this type of audience is like this. I think there's a difference between the Malaysian audience, for example, and the Japanese audience. The Japanese audience tend to be more, I suppose, reserved. They're such a wonderful, lovely group of people, the Japanese. I mean, I love Japan. I love the Japanese people. And when it's in a speaking environment, they're not as boisterous or animated in their responses. They're very polite, but it's hard to know whether or not what you're doing is registering. You know, they have a great sense of humor, but it's not always easy to read the audience. Malaysia, and to some degree as well, I suppose, Thailand, Indonesia, They're very friendly as well, very warm, very lovely audience. A little easier to read, not as easy as, for example, it might be in the States or in the US, but certainly, very, very easygoing, very sort of great attitude, great mindset that they bring to the table, really open to learning, which I love. And I think some of the Western, I think America in general, they're more animated in their response to it. Back home where I come from, and I'm actually from Dublin in Ireland in Europe, and where I come from, it's actually, I find it that the audience is a little bit more skeptical than they might be, for example, in the US. So in the US, the audience tends to be generally very open, very animated, very ha ha ha, very, standing ovation-esque type. Whereas in Ireland, that's not at all like that. We're much more reserved in the way they respond. Across the pond from us, UK, I think they're not that animated either, in my experience. I've done quite a lot of work in both Scotland as well as England and whatnot. And then certain parts of Europe, it depends. So the Italians are a great audience. I've spent a lot of time with the Italians, and they're a lot of fun. But generally speaking, every country I've ever been to, and this is going to sound like pandering, but every country I've been to, I really have loved the audience. There's never been because you like them for different reasons. So you like them because they're skeptical, because they've got a sarcastic sense of humor. And once you connect into that, it's wonderful. Or you like them because they're so friendly, or you like them because they're so animated. So to me, I see greatness I see the greatness of the audience everywhere. And my job as a speaker or teacher is to try to connect with whatever makes that audience great and lean into that. And when you do that, I think you get the most amount of fulfillment from every engagement that you're doing.
It's interesting. So when was the time that you started, thinking that, okay, I would like to be a global speaker? Because we find that a lot of speakers are good speakers. However, they stay just locally in their country, and they find it a bit difficult for, to break through and all that. So what was that aha moment and say, okay, I want to get out?
Yeah. So for me, I started off in the very earliest part of my career teaching NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and I got to know the co-creator of NLP. I started working on book projects with Dr. Richard Bandler, who's the co-creator of NLP. And from there on in, I would travel quite a lot to see Richard teach in different countries, and I would meet a lot of people from different countries. And they would see me, doing little bits and pieces of small trainings in small groups there and whatnot, and they would get to become more aware of me. And so that kind of opened some doors to possibly going. And I think the very first time I went and did an international session was in Austria, actually, back in 2002. And that was the first sort of outside of Ireland event that I did. I might have done one, maybe I went to Scotland around the same year and delivered a training there. But I certainly know that when I delivered my piece or my talk in Austria, that was the first time I needed translation, and It was sequential translation, and that was a big learning curve for me. And then from there on in, I started working in Italy. I went to India in 2003. I went to Japan in 2005. I went to Colombia in 2006.
You can remember all the years and the places.
Yeah. Well, these are big points, because the first time you go to a country, it's a big deal, especially these huge countries. I remember the first time I went to Brazil as well, and that was about just over 10 years ago, and then the Middle East as well. Like, when you go to a place for the first time, at least for me, it stands out in my mind. And it stands out because it's all new and it's exciting. And even from a neurochemistry perspective, when you go somewhere new and you're experiencing something new for the first time, you get a massive rush of a chemical called dopamine, which makes that memory easier to remember. So all of the first times that I've ever had in terms of speaking, I have a pretty good memory for it because of that. But you never forget when you're standing out on stage in front of a totally different culture and totally different group or audience. And then it's about, can you connect with them? Can you figure it out? Can you relate to them? Because, obviously I come from city in Dublin, Ireland. which is very different to where I live now, New York, very different to Kuala Lumpur, very different to Bangkok, very different to Sao Paulo. So how can I connect with people that are from a very different part of the world than I am and relate to them? And that's the hard part, but that's also the fun part.
But I think coming from where you came from, it would be much easier for you to, adapt to the people from, especially over my part of the world, as compared to if I were to go over to your side. Don't you think so? I mean, as a comparison,
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I think, I don't know. I mean, I think on the one hand, maybe because, well, I think maybe for me, because I've traveled a lot, I don't think it's about where you come from. I think it's about what you're exposed to. So for me, the reason why it's easier for me to go international, like if someone hires me in a different country, the reason it's easy for me to go, it's partly obviously the years of experience, but a big part of it is the fact that I travel a lot and I like to travel a lot and I like putting myself in uncomfortable, uncertain situations. I don't think the fact that I'm Irish makes it easier than if I was from Malaysia, or makes it, I think sometimes people from certain countries, because they don't see as many role models from that country doing things on a global stage, sometimes they can think to themselves, well, no one from my country has done, this incredible, or these incredible speeches. But I could easily say the same thing from an Irish perspective. There's not that many keynote speakers from Ireland. There are not that many very well-known, world-renowned. A lot of them are American. So I could easily say, well, it's easy for Americans to go internationally than it is for me, but that's not true, because I've probably traveled more than most of them, and therefore that's the advantage. It's not the advantage because where I'm from. The advantage is where I've been and what I'm comfortable with. And I think the real trick to it is to be comfortable in the uncomfortable, to be able to be okay with uncertainty. And, if you decided, Dr. Wendy, with your experience and your knowledge and your wisdom, if you decided that you were going to go to a different country, a large part of it is just taking that risk and betting on yourself and realizing that at the base level, humans are humans. And you just have to figure out, you do your research, you do your due diligence. But if you went to Ireland, you just try to figure out, what do you know about the Irish? And you get to talk to a few Irish people and you get a sense for their sense of humor. You get a sense for what they're interested in. You get a sense for what's in the news. You get a sense for their history, their background, right? If you step up in Ireland and you turn around and you start your presentation with, oh, great to see everyone in the UK, you're going to lose the audience straight away, because, we're very proud of not being, at least the Republic, not being part of the UK. Right. So if you adapt and you say, I'm so delighted to be in Ireland, never had the chance to visit here before, wonderful, blah, blah, and you recognize some of the things that we're proud of, then immediately you win the audience over. So I don't think it's where you're from. I think it's based upon how open we are to the new experiences and, betting on ourselves a bit more. I think sometimes we're our own worst enemy. We can beat ourselves up and hold ourselves back. The whole imposter phenomenon can limit us. And I think doesn't matter where you're from, you've got so much to offer because of that, because of the diversity that you can bring to the table. And I think if more people from more countries push themselves to, get out there, they would see that they can make a real impact.
So if I were to ask you, if you could name one thing that you find you have learned from this particular journey of yours, one of the toughest moments that you've had, would you be able to remember and recall one?
I can recall lots. The only problem is trying to figure out which one I choose. So, a lot of the times the hardest challenges are the ones that, like, they really are the best for you, right? Because when you come up against a difficult audience, and usually a difficult audience is an audience that doesn't want to be there, an audience where you are the token person put in front of them, and you have to try to win them over. And I had a lot of that back home. I had a lot of that in Ireland, where because you're working in corporate, not everyone in the corporation or the organization wants to be there. They're forced to go. And sometimes the way it's framed, and this is internationally, when you do work in an organization, sometimes the way it's framed is there's something wrong with you and we're bringing in an expert to train you how to be better. And that framing itself is a death knell to the speaker, because it doesn't matter what you do. When you go in there, you have the whole audience, with their arms crossed going, "Oh, you're going to fix me now, are you?" And that's problematic.
Yes.
So, those kind of situations are, and then you've other audiences that aren't very responsive, because culturally, for example, in Eastern Europe, right? In Eastern Europe, they tend to be not very responsive compared to other parts of Europe. So if you go to some of the Baltics, if you go to, Lithuania or Latvia, which I've been lucky enough, I love those audiences. They're very similar sense of humor to Ireland, but they are quite skeptical and cynical. They're certainly not going to, jump up and, get too animated or too excited. I still love the audience, though, because they remind me a lot of home in many ways. But there's a big difference there, and it's hard initially to work with audiences like that. But the beauty is, the worst experiences you ever have give you a massive amount of confidence, because I know that I can go into any audience now, and no matter how bad it gets, I've probably been through worse. Therefore, I know how to be able to deal with it. And so there's those kind of stories from actually speaking. Then there's stories of me getting into trouble and mischief and getting, chased down the street by people and getting, almost kidnapped. Like, there's lots of stories of the adventures given when you just travel and you just take these, I suppose, going to different countries that not that many people go to.
Wow. So now talking to you, right? It's like there's so much to do for a speaker, right? So getting that global speaking fellow is a big deal. So would you mind sharing with the listeners?
Sure.
What kind of things do you need to do to be called a global speaking fellow? I mean, a lot of us want to be great speakers, but not everyone is ready to do it. Yeah.
Sure. So you have to have demonstrated that you have spoken in a certain amount of areas of the world, right? So there's a number of areas that you have to, some criteria of a number of areas of the world that you have to have spoken in. You have to demonstrate that you've gotten paid for speaking events in all of these different parts of the world. You have to have people that will give you recommendations, and people that the organizers can reach out to verify that you are indeed you have indeed spoken and that you're well recommended and whatnot. So you have to get in touch with a lot of the past people that have hired you. And you also will send in a video, and the videos should be of at least 2 different places, demonstrating your cultural acumen, demonstrating your ability to be able to adapt to different cultures, to respond differently, to show that you're paying attention to where that audience is from. So it's not just you doing your keynote dog and pony show. It's about you being able to adapt to the audience in the moment, and through watching the video evidence, I suppose, someone should get the sense that, the person is adapting it to that particular type of audience. I think there's less than 50. It might even be around 40 or so, but certainly less than 50 GSF global fellows in the world. So it's a lovely little sort of accolade to have. It's a great.
It is.
I'm very lucky.
Yeah. So if I were to ask, what are some of the practical things, or any simple tricks or insights that you can share for people who want to be better at talking to others from different backgrounds? Simple tips.
Sure.
So you're going global.
The first one's the obvious one: do your research. So before I went, for example, to Malaysia, I spent a lot of time talking to the organizer, talking to my promoter in Malaysia about the Malaysian culture, about the Malaysian people. I studied a little bit about about Malaysian history. And what I want to do is, when I get up there, it's not that I'm going to necessarily use it, but I want to understand it. And I'm also, while I'm doing that, I'm also thinking to myself, how can I relate to this from being from Ireland? What is it that Irish people and, for example, Malaysians have in common? And so the research piece is a big part of it, because it gets you sort of a sense as to the audience that you're speaking to. And I think the best speakers I know are the ones that are speaking with the audience and speaking to the audience. They're not the ones that have a speech and are just delivering that. So regardless of where you're from, because a lot of the humor, and this is a big piece, it's not the easiest from a strategic point of view, like from a strategy point of view to get good at. but it's one of the things that will set you apart is being able to adapt to different senses of humor. So if I go to Japan, the same jokes that I use in the States are not going to work. But if I go to Japan, different jokes will work that won't be as funny in America. And so what you have to do is when you go to the country, the second sort of tip, which is again not as easy to implement, but is you got to start to explore and try to understand and get a feel for what makes audiences laugh in that country. Because they do have a certain sense of humor. Now you can watch some of the TV shows and whatnot, but getting that sense, it's almost like music, right? It's almost like jazz. You're playing around and you're trying to figure out what makes them laugh. And when you figure that out, you get a sense for this is the kind of humor that works in this country, and this is the kind of humor that works in this country. And that allows you then to create a deeper bond with them. And when you can make an audience laugh when you're an outsider in their country, it's one of the quickest, fastest ways to create a strong connection. So if you can do that, again, that's not the easiest one. The easy one is to do the research and to study a bit of the history and whatnot and all that sort of stuff. And then the third thing is try to experience as much of the culture as possible while you're there. Try to expose yourself, talk to the people that are there, listen to them, notice their personalities, watch for any patterns that you might notice, and enjoy it. And you know, what I always try to do is fall in love with the country that you're speaking. When you do that, it just makes it easier because most countries you go to, the people there are very proud of their country and they love their country. And if you just fake it and you pretend something, it's not always going to work. But if you can genuinely try to fall in love with the country, it's a game changer because it means that you're now starting to see the country through their eyes, and through that lens, that's also a way that you can, you know, build a shared connection.
Interesting. So how long do you predict yourself to be a global speaker? How long more? If you have a choice.
Listen, here's the thing. Someone asked me recently, Owen, what about retirement? And I'm saving for different things, but if you ask me like about retirement, I'm going into the grave on stage. Like I want to be speaking until I can no longer speak. Because I love what I do. I love sharing the messages that I have to share, teaching what I have to teach. I love the process of speaking. I love the process of writing. So for me, the thought of me retiring and not speaking and not writing, it's just not an option for me. So I'm gonna, if I die on stage, a lot of times we have a saying, hope I don't die on stage because dying on stage is like doing a terrible job. Well, I've died on stage plenty of times, and they've been the things that have taught me the most. So if I actually die on stage, it's not a terrible way to go. It's probably traumatic for the audience, though. So from their perspective, I wouldn't want it to happen. But I do. I think that I want to be doing this as long as I can, and I'm going to keep going out there and keep traveling and having these adventures. And when it's time to call it a day, well, I'll go wherever I'm meant to go after this life.
Yeah, people will remember Owen.
Some people will, not always in a good way, but sometimes that's okay.
Okay, so looks like we are in time for everything. So thanks for joining us, Owen. So any final words or messages you want to leave with our listeners?
No,
and all our listeners, our speakers. Yeah.
Yes, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Wendy. If anyone does want to check out any more information, I've got a website, owenfitzpatrick.com, and I have a newsletter, owenfitzpatrick.com/newsletter. A lot of times I share some stories of being on the road and whatnot. So that's owenfitzpatrick.com/newsletter. And I also have a podcast, Changing Minds, as well is the name. So if anyone does want to reach out and hear more from me, then you're very welcome to. But it's been a pleasure. I've loved our chat, Dr. Wendy, and hopefully I get the chance to see you doing your thing, speaking on stage somewhere international at some point.
Thank you very much, Owen, for being with us today. It was lovely chatting with you. I hope our listeners have learned a thing or two from you, our Global Speaking Fellow. So here's all the best in your globe-trotting journey. I hope you have a wonderful time speaking internationally everywhere around the world. And may we meet each other one day soon when you come over to Asia or Malaysia.